Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Institute of Economic Affairs, I'm delighted to welcome you to our 5th webinar of this year on this International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to all the women on this call. And thank you to the men here as well, who continue to support the initiatives towards gender parity. So we see you and we appreciate you as well. So my name is Jacqueline Kagume, and I work at the IEA as a program officer under the Constitution, Law and Economy program. And for those of you who may have not interacted with the IEA previously, the IEA is a think tank with a mission to shape decisions in public affairs in Kenya through research, analysis, and generation of insights to inform policy design and policy innovation. So we work across 6 program areas or 6 thematic areas, and our aim is to contribute to the formulation of rational economic policy. So we are very pleased that you're able to join us today for our webinar. As you saw in the titling on the agenda, our webinar today is on Kenya's progress towards gender equality in line with the International Women's Day that we are celebrating today. So just to give a brief background, as some of you may be aware, this International Women's Day is normally celebrated globally, annually, to basically focus global attention on the state of women in terms of gender equality, and just to take a step and look back at what steps have been made towards gender parity. And the aim for this is to highlight and call for reduction of the various biases that are mostly to the disadvantage of women, to call for elimination of stereotypes and ways to reduce the discrimination that has been faced by women in different parts of the globe. And it was basically necessitated by a history of disadvantage, mostly disadvantage faced by women. So the theme for this year's International Women's Day is Break the Bias, as some of you may have seen on publications on the internet. And it is in line with that theme that we have organized the webinar that we have today. We'll have 3 speakers, a 3-speaker panel to discuss, to break down the topic that we have today. And I'll introduce them in a bit. We have an all-female panel, basically to celebrate women working in think tanks and to celebrate the research work by different women. IEA has a diverse team, both male and female, with an almost 50-50 split. And I can say at least on that, we're doing pretty well. So to represent our colleagues, we'll have a 3-speaker panel. And then during plenary, I'll invite any other person that may want to add or contribute to the discussion that we have. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to mention and acknowledge the IEA's PFM program. They are the conveners of this webinar. That's the Public Finance Management Program of the IEA. They've been implementing a project in partnership with Kenyatta University, and the project is supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And basically, it's on gender responsive budgeting, and that work is mainly to track the effects of budgets and spending on women's economic empowerment. So the PFM program has put this together and brought us together. So we'd like to acknowledge them and also acknowledge the participation of anyone from Kenyatta University who is also here to chip into this debate. We'll hear a little more about that project in the course of the and during plenary. So as I stated, we have a 3 presentation looking at Kenya's progress towards gender equality. And the first part basically lays out the context. We'll discuss the state of play, looking at the legal background, what steps have been made towards basically towards the promotion of gender parity. And for this part of the presentation, we will have Anna Grace discuss what progress has been made here. She works under the IEA Special Program, and she will tell us what are some of the domestic and international obligations that Kenya has in terms of promoting gender parity. And Anna will also discuss any progress that has been made in terms of affirmative action programs, policies, if we have made positive steps or not, she will tell us. So that's the first part of the presentation. And then we'll go into the second part, which is basically on women and the economy. So having elaborated what the regulatory framework is on gender equality, then we will have a section on women and the economy, and my colleague Darmi, who works under the PFM program and who's been implementing the project that I spoke about, will basically tell us more about women's contribution to the economy and women's participation and contribution, basically, in a nutshell. Her presentation will look at, she'll provide us with the data in terms of what the numbers say, looking at labor force participation by women. Are we able to quantify women's contribution to the GDP? Do they have the numbers for that? She will tell us that. She will discuss financial inclusion, women's participation in business and enterprise, and basically just an overall assessment of women's contribution to the economy. And then after Darmi, we'll have the third part of the presentation will be made by my colleague Winnie, and it will basically be a discussion on the regional perspective, just a regional comparison in terms of gender equality. So looking at Kenya's situation, what steps have been made? How does it compare to the region in terms of closing the gender gaps? Are we doing well? Are we doing badly compared to our peers? And Winnie works in the Futures and Foresight program, so she'll also give us some perspectives in terms of what the future holds for women in terms of gender parity. After the three presentations, we'll come to a plenary session. And during plenary, I will check if we have participation by one of our partners for the project that I mentioned that PFM is implementing. And if one of them is here, then we'll give them an opportunity to make some remarks. And then we'll also open it up for any question and answers that anyone might have. So that's the background to our discussion here today. And before I invite Anna to proceed, I'd like to request you to kindly note down any questions you might have. We have a dialogue box on this platform, so please note down your questions. You can see who you're addressing it to. Our speakers will try and respond as we go, but also note that we'll give you an opportunity to ask verbally during the plenary session. So I think we've regulated the mics and the videos, but you'll be allowed to, they'll be deactivated during the plenary so that you can participate and ask questions. So I thank you once again for joining us this morning for this important discussion. And I invite Anna Grace to take us through the first part of the presentation on the legal background to towards gender equality in Kenya. Anna, you're welcome.
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Grace, and I'll take you through the legal and policy background, which we will discuss with relation to the International Women's Day 2022. So to begin with, in Kenya, one of the main binding documents is the Constitution of Kenya 2010. And in Chapter 4, which is the Bill of Rights, Part 2, Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, Article 27, Equality and Freedom from Discrimination, Sub-Article 1, 2, 3, 6, and even 8 speak to gender equality. Sub-Article 1 is every equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and equal benefit, every person, both male and female. Sub-Article 2, equality includes the full enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. Once again, equal rights for women. Sub-Article 3, women and men have the right to equal treatment, including the right to equal opportunities in political, economic, cultural, and social spheres. We'll speak about this in later slides. How are we doing in terms of equal opportunities across these four spheres? Sub-Article 6 to emphasize on is that, as the Constitution has stated in Sub-Article 1 to 3, it now gives power to the state to take legislative and other measures, including affirmative action programs and policies designed to redress any disadvantages suffered by individuals or groups because of past discrimination. And in this case, we'll focus on women who are predominantly disadvantaged, and affirmative actions taken by the government, including affirmative action policies and affirmative action programs to ensure women are not left behind. Which takes us to affirmative action policies. So just to level the ground here, what do we mean by affirmative action policies? Affirmative action is the active effort to improve employment, education, and other opportunities for members of groups that have been disadvantaged. And today, being International Women's Day, we look at the women who are disadvantaged in this case. And affirmative action policies taken by the government of Kenya are quite a number, but on this slide, we've just mentioned a few. One of them being the National Gender and Development Policy of 2000. There's also the Monitoring and Evaluation Framework for Gender Mainstreaming, 2009. So you'll hear us speak a lot about gender mainstreaming, and this just mainly means that we do realize that gender inequality is a problem, and we are going to try and make this a conversation every step of the way, whether it's through employment in government. The government is actually making an effort to ensure that at least in some areas, women are given equal opportunity as men. To speak to this, we talk about the 2/3 gender rule, which is also under Article 27 of the Constitution. And here it just basically says that at least no gender shall occupy more than 2/3 of an office or elected office or appointed office in the government. And that's what we mean by gender mainstreaming and affirmative action, Another affirmative action policy is the National Equality Policy of 2017. And finally, the Policy for the Eradication of Female Genital Mutilation of 2017. Female genital mutilation is a practice that disadvantages women, not to even speak about the health effects it has on women who later on probably would experience challenges in childbirth, even just being able to go to school, once you've undergone female genital mutilation, it becomes a challenge. And this spills over from health to education, finally even to employment. And the overall effect is productivity of women goes down, and that's not what we want. We'll move on to Vision 2030, which is also an affirmative action policy. And part of the objectives of Vision 2030 is to address challenges limiting inadequate gender disaggregated data for effective policy simulation. So when you're trying to come up with policies to the effect of helping the plight of women, then you need data to support, evidence to support your policies. And if the data is not available, it becomes hard to take a position. But thankfully, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics has come up with at least 3 documents: the Women and Men in Kenya Facts and Figures booklet of 2017, the Gender Data Sheet 2015, and the Status of Women Report 2017. These are statistical publications that have actually made a conscious effort to disaggregate data by gender so that we can see how much progress have we made in terms of equality, gender equality, and in what areas do we need to improve. But here's the IEA. We propose for even a greater effort to be done towards collection of disaggregated election data, because this is an election year. We'd like to see, as much as, yes, IEBC does report on the number of voters who registered and those who actually voted, can we see the split by gender, and even in more detail, which will be discussed in later slides. And maybe also to add on to this is disaggregation of employment data. We know it's there, probably by employment in public and private sector, but could we go further into income levels and sector employment? Then on to the next affirmative action is affirmative action programs. And again, this is not a conclusive list, but just a selection of a few. We have the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, Uwezo Fund, Women Enterprise Fund, Access to Government Procurement Opportunities, also known as AGPO. I'll start with these four, which you might see as heavily intertwined or interlinked, but they all speak to a similar objective, which is to help women, and not only women, but also the youth, PWDs, in the economic struggle. So if we're saying they're disadvantaged, they don't have as much access to funds to start up enterprises or enough access to government opportunities like AGPO speaks to. AGPO actually, it was set to specifically allocate at least 30% of government procurement to women, youth, and persons living with disabilities. And from their website, they reported that of the about 45,000 tenders since their inception, 44% have actually gone to youth, and a whole 53% of those tenders have gone to women, leaving 3% to PWD. So that 53% is the chunk of all the three groups. And I think that's something we can applaud the government for. It's actually a affirmative action program that we can see is being implemented. Women Enterprise Fund, Uwezo Fund, and NGAAF are all also either capacity building or providing them with funds to start up businesses. There's also the Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Board, which was established under the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act of 2011. Then we have selected ministries, departments, and agencies with gender-related objectives. Once again, this list is not comprehensive, but just a highlight of some of these MDAs that are either directly speaking to gender-related objectives, gender equality, or are overseeing some of these affirmative action programs and policies. So the first is the Ministry of Public Service and Gender. And under this, we have the State Department for Gender Affairs, which is responsible for oversight of a big chunk of this affirmative action policies we've just mentioned in the previous slide. We also have the National Gender Equality Commission. There is also the Ministry of Education, by virtue of them being committed to providing free compulsory basic education to every child. And every child here means irrespective of gender, whether male or female, in the country, in accordance with the Basic Education Act of 2013. And as we'll mention in later slides, Kenya has actually achieved gender parity in primary school enrollment. So that's a big plus. We hope to see even greater efforts towards gender parity as people progress through the education cycle. But yeah, small progress. Then finally, we have ratified international and regional treaties and conventions that Kenya has signed, and also speak to gender equality. Again, this is not a comprehensive list, but just a selection of a few, and I'll highlight some of them. The first being the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This is hitting hard today because if you're keen on social media, you're able to see the story of the very horrific incident on Forest Road over the weekend. And that's something that is very core to this convention, elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. That woman was discriminated and her body was even violated. We have at the bottom of the page, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action of 1995. This, I think, is a very core declaration because, I mean, you can see as far as 1995, gender equality was an issue. It's not a new concept. And in this declaration, 12 areas of particular interest to gender equality were identified, and this now became the set of principles concerning equality for men and women. And some of them include women and poverty, education and training of women, women and health, violence against women, women and armed conflict, and even women in the economy. There were 12 key areas, but I've just highlighted 6 of them. And as you'll see later in our slides, some of these areas are actually what are being used by indices to rank countries' performance in terms of gender equality. And if Kenya can focus on at least making progress in each of those areas, I think we'd make a huge difference in terms of achieving gender equality. That's it for section 1 on legal and policy background. We move on to the next section, which is women and the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Grace, for taking us through the first part of the presentation. My name is Dharmi Chatani, and I work under the Public Finance Management Program, which, as Jackie mentioned, is also currently implementing a project on gender responsive budgeting in partnership with Kenyatta University Women Economic Empowerment Hub. So for today's, my part of the presentation will be speaking to women and the economy. And the topic is a bit biased, one, because we also deal a lot with economic affairs and economic policies, but also, again, the participation in the economy is a key area in terms of women empowerment. And that's why we are looking at this. So on the next slide, we will begin by looking at Kenya's progress towards gender equality. So these results are from the Global Gender Gap Index 2021 and also previous publications to provide for some comparison. And this Global Gender Gap Index measures different progress by a set of countries, almost, I think, 156 for the 2021 report. And the goal is just to provide for country-to-country comparison. And because the index focuses on 4 key areas, to point out in terms of policy interventions, which areas should a country target in order to achieve gender parity. So looking at the trend line on the screen right now, we see at the topmost, we have in gray, which shows Kenya's progress towards attainment of gender parity in health and survival. And this index measures from a score of 0 to 1, with 0 being the least progress made towards gender parity, and 1 being the ultimate and where we are all aiming to get at. So look at followed next as Anna and education again achieved. Gap still remains in education, and this just points to the fact, yes, the free compulsory basic education has helped us achieve parity in in primary enrollment, but there is need to look at those areas that are limiting retention or transition of girls from primary to secondary and from secondary to the tertiary levels. But the existence of policies to support education is actually manifested in the scores that we have earned when it comes to attainment, educational attainment. Again, under health and survival, we know the government has initiated a lot of maternal health programs. We've seen Beyond Zero campaign by the First Lady. We also have the Linda Mama program, which also aims to ensure that all women get access to free maternal health. And indeed, all this progress can be seen in terms of attainment in education and health and survival. As at 2021, we see a slight drop in terms of the gender gap closed for education, 0.93 to 0.929. This could also be attributed maybe just to the in the economy as a result of the pandemic, but we see it wasn't a huge drop, but a slight drop for both health and education. But we see a recovery in economic participation, which is the trend line in the color blue. And we also see some slight improvement in political empowerment. Just to note, by looking at this trend line, you can already tell which areas Kenya has made the least progress in terms of achieving gender parity. And it points to political empowerment and economic participation. Just to clarify, the index looks at various sub-indices that together culminate to give the scores for political empowerment, under which there are three key ones, which is women in parliament, women in ministerial positions, and also women as the head of state. Of course, having a woman at the head of state, Kenya scores 0, but we have scores of 0.27 for women in parliament and a score of 0.45 for women in ministerial position. So that is just an indicative of why we are performing so poorly in this political empowerment indicator, and why we need to also improve the numbers of women in parliament and ministerial positions to have some shift in this cause and match up to where we are in terms of economic participation and education. The blue line shows economic participation and opportunity. Here again, we see a slight improvement from the 2020 report and 2021. It improved from 0.598 to 0.672. And looking at the report, this can be attributed to, in the next slide, we will see what are some of the key sub-indices under economic participation and opportunity. And there has been some improvement in terms of women representation in technical positions. And that could most likely explain why there is an improvement in terms of economic participation and opportunity. But again, we see we have around 32.8% in terms of the gender gap that still exists in economic participation. And as shown on the slide, the key sub-indices that are weighted under economic participation include labor force participation. And when you look at this labor participation rate, it's at 94.3%. This is just to point that in terms of participation, there seems to be some the figures here are identical for both male and female, but as we move to wage equality for similar work, we see the scores start to drop. So again, we note that participating in the labor force does not seem to be an issue, but being compensated enough as men and being given senior positions is what seems to have a lot of inequality. So if you look at professional and technical workers, we see that the gap closed there is still low, and it's even worse when you look at the legislators and senior officials and managers. We've only managed to to close a gender gap of 32.9%. So because the scores for economic participation and opportunity is a weighted average of all these scores, then it goes to show which parts are we lagging behind in terms of improving our scores under economic participation. So to show what I have just explained in terms of labor force participation, there has been a lot of improvement in ensuring that more women are actively participating, but the characteristics in that market is what differs. So this data we've used a bit an outdated data, because in the subsequent slides we will be talking about women contribution to the economy, and that data is based on the 2015 and 16 data. So just to maintain the consistency, that is why we use these numbers, but an updated data is also available in the Economic Survey 2021. So as at 2015-2016, as given in the Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey, we have this is in thousands, so it's 8.699 million female. So when you look at employment, you notice that the female are less in comparison to the number of male. But when you look at the unemployed people, you notice that that picture switches. Now female are higher than the male. So this again shows that unemployment disproportionately affects female more than male. So labor force participation is given by the total number of employed and unemployed, and that is what is shown in the fourth column. Again, we have people in for the unemployed, it means these are people who are actively seeking employment and they're willing to work if they get employment. But for inactive means these are the proportion of female and male that are not actively searching for job because maybe they're engaged in other sectors of the economy like education, or yes, maybe still in school. And as long as they're within that age of 18 to 56, they were counted. And you notice that, again, when it comes to inactive, female again are disproportionately more than male. So this is just to confirm that in terms of labor force participation, when you look at the fourth column, female is at 9.625, and for male it's at 9.685 and million. So this is just to confirm that we have made a lot of progress in terms of labor force participation, but we need to improve so that in terms of earnings and also wage equality, there is some kind of parity in the same. So looking at the scores and how far Kenya has, the progress Kenya has made towards attainment of gender parity in economic participation, we are cognizant of certain factors that contribute towards how effective women are able to participate in the economy. So again, we look at this data from the Small and Medium Enterprises Report, and the pie chart on the left shows ownership of licensed micro, small, and medium enterprises. And on the right-hand side, we see ownership of unlicensed micro and small, medium enterprises. John, thank you for the clarification. The labor force participation age is 15 to 64 years. Yeah, thank you for the correction. So looking at ownership of micro, small, and medium enterprises, the blue bar, the blue section of the pie chart is what shows female ownership of those MSMEs. And when you look at the licensed, we see that female ownership is only at 32.1%. And on the right side, when you look at the ownership of unlicensed, you see now there is a larger proportion of female, which moves not from 32.1% to 60.7%. This is key to note because we understand the challenges of unlicensed MSMEs. Indeed, the policies and the affirmative action programs are there to support women in businesses through access to credits, but we know unlicensed MSMEs have limited access to credit, so that also limits expansion of their businesses and services. And even access to these government procurement services, you have to be a licensed company. So we see again, women are disproportionately large owners of unlicensed MSMEs. So as much as there is funds allocation towards supporting women in business, it's also good, it will also be positive to look at some of these factors that are limiting women's participation in the economy so that these funds are not left unused or women are not able to access them because of challenges such as this. And when we look at male only licensed, we see that male have 47.9%, and the total number of all these MSMEs was 7.4 million. So these percentages are a share of that total sum. We see that male are more on the licensed MSMEs at 47.9, and they present a smaller proportion under unlicensed at 31.4%. So again, the data goes further to show male-male partnerships, and across all we see that the proportions of female-female partners is equally larger under unlicensed MSMEs from 1% to 1.1%. Yes, so that slide summarizes ownership of MSMEs by both gender and indicating who's more disadvantaged when it comes to ownership of unlicensed MSMEs. So this slide speaks to women's contribution to the economy. So this data is also based on the 2015 and 16 Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey. And the use of that data is because it's the most comprehensive and covers all households in Kenya. And the author tried to look at two scenarios. So tried to look at the base case and tried to look at a scenario where women and men are compensated equally. So here, the total economy's output, GDP, is calculated in time using the income approach. So income approach, we consider compensation of employees, which is mostly wages and also non-wage benefits like health insurance. And operating surplus is basically profits made by firms in the economy. So as it is now, this data confirms that women compensation in the economy is at 61.1% of the share of men compensation. And at this, just to take you to the most bottom row, which tells us women's contribution to the GDP as a share of GDP, we see that the total for compensation, it's 3.8, operating surplus is 31.1, and we have a total of 34.88%. So this is the case as it is now, and this gives the base case. And the author further tries to look at what would it be in a scenario where men and women are compensated equally. And we notice that the total contribution to GDP shifts from 34.8 to 41.1, and this is roughly around 6 percentage points. But in terms of the total value, it shifts from 3.397 billion to 4,000 billion. So in terms of that nominal value, then we see there is an economic loss of around Kenyan shilling 600 billion when women are not compensated equally. So as much as we advocate for gender equality as a constitutional mandate and also as a social justice issue, there is need to also incorporate the economic loss argument, because this is also output that we will be contributing to our economy just by ensuring that men and women are compensated equally. So this slide again, because for implementation of policies and programs, government must allocate resources. And Kenya has committed towards ensuring gender responsive budgeting. And IEA is currently tracking the national government's budget just to see how much of it is gender responsive. But this slide, this representation borrowed from a presentation by Collaborative Center for Gender Development, points to the fact that even in financial year 2021-2022, only 406 billion out of the total budget allocation for the financial year was gender responsive. And the goal, as Anna tried to highlight some sectors and MDAs that focus on gender-related initiatives, but the goal should be to ensure that all sectors are gender responsive, and to accomplish that, the best option is to have a gender responsive budget. So this only represents 11% of the total budget, and the goal is to move this share of the budget that is gender responsive from 11% to progressively eventually reach 100%. And when you see there is only a few select sectors that have budget that is related to gender, and this just goes to confirm that as much as Anna told us that Kenya is committed to gender mainstreaming across all our sectors, there seems to be some reluctance across all sectors where it's only focused on agriculture, social protection, health, education, and water, but there is need to also cascade all these initiatives across all other sectors and ensure that all our budget is gender responsive. So just to conclude on the section on women and the economy, I'd like to give the state of play when it comes to financial inclusion. We know that financial inclusion is crucial to facilitate women's participation in the economy. And this also presents a very positive picture. And this is data from FinAccess Household Survey 2021. And it shows that as much as women are still not at par to men in terms of financial inclusion, the gap between men and women has been reducing over time. And we see that as of 2021, the difference was only 4.2 because the male were at 85.9% of the men in the survey could had financial access, and it was only 81.7% of female for the same year. But we noticed that in the previous year, the difference was 5.2%, the disparity in terms of financial inclusion. So this also indicates that there is improvement in terms of reducing the gender gap and moving towards parity in terms of financial inclusion. Obviously, this is important again because it reflects on access to credit and how best women can participate in the economy using the resources that they're able to access. Despite this good picture, I think to maintain it and eventually ensure that women and men are at par is to continue expanding credit and also using monetary tools to ensure that the current interest rates are also within rates within which it is favorable to business people. I'll allow my colleague Winnie to take us through the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Darmi, and thank you, Anna, for your presentations that have largely brought to light where women are at in terms of gender equality. And as we move to this part of the presentation, we will be looking at where Kenya is at, and we just try to make a comparison globally, and then we'll make a regional comparison just to bring an understanding of where Kenya is really at when it comes to gender equality and ensuring it. We know we've been faced with several challenges, but we just want to understand, compared to our peers regionally, where are we at when it comes to closing the gap, closing the gender gap. So I'll just move to making a global comparison where we're looking at the global progress towards gender equality. And in this slide, we have just made a representation of what is happening globally and what is happening in Kenya. And so when you look at educational attainment, for example, in 2019, when the index was conducted, the average educational attainment score was 95.6%, and for Kenya it was at 92.9%. There is a difference of about 2 point something between the average global score and the Kenyan score. And then as we make progress, you notice that we made an improvement in 2020 to 93.8, and then we made a decline to 92.9%. Then when you look at what has happened globally, you notice that there was an increase and then a decline, but the global score has managed to get back to the score in 2019, which was 95.6, with a difference of about 0.6%, and Kenya has made a decline in that sector. When you're looking at health and survival, the average global score in 2019 was 95.4. There's been a decline up until 2021 to 96% score. And there has been a decline for Kenya to 97.5 with a difference of about 0.5%. Then when we come to economic participation, in 2019, we made the global average score was at around 58.1%, and for Kenya, it was at 73.4%. Both have made progress towards getting back to the 2019 score from the 2021, where we are having the economic score got back to 58 for the average global and to 67.2. So Kenya is slowly making progress towards getting back to the 73.4% score at 2019, though we are still not yet there. And then in terms of political participation, it is very evident that most countries in the index are not performing too well in this area, because in 2020 we made there was a global progress of about 1 point something improvement from 22.9 to 24.7% score, and then there was a decrease to 22, back to where we were coming from, and actually even lower by 0.9%. But for Kenya, we have been making a progress, albeit slowly, but there is a progress from 15.9% to 19.3%. So yes, we are making some progress, though very slowly. So when you're looking at the average, we are moving from the global index has largely maintained, with a small difference in 2020 of about 0.6%, but otherwise it has maintained an average of about 68. For Kenya, though, we made a sharp decline of about 2.9% in 2020 to 67.1%. And then we made an improvement to 69.2%. So you can clearly see there's no very clear balance for Kenya and even the global scores, where we are having an increase and a decline, though with very small margins, but those are still noticed. So if you make a comparison for how Kenya is performing with its peers in the next slide, before we go to the next slide, we based on the changes that we've experienced as a country, we note that it will take Kenya approximately 137 years to achieve gender equality. That means if we look at in terms of generations, that means about 5 generations would have to be in existence before we actually get to achieve gender equality. So what Kenya should be looking forward to is to shrink the number of years that we would actually require for us to achieve gender parity. And for us to achieve that, again, we have to look at the policies that we have in place and what areas we are experiencing challenges, and what needs to be done in those said areas for us to now be on the right trajectory of achieving gender equality. So on the next slide, we look at Kenya's performance against other East African countries. And on this, we will just focus on Rwanda and Kenya, as we notice that that Rwanda performs the best when it comes to gender equality for East African countries. And this can be attributed to a few things that they have gotten right or they have worked towards. So, for instance, when you're looking at economic participation and opportunities presented in Rwanda, we notice that senior managerial and senior roles and managerial roles have doubled up in Rwanda, and the women are taking up more positions in the professional and technical roles, and it is estimated that is to an estimate of about 40% in those said positions. But in Kenya, we are really struggling with that, as we notice that for legislation, senior roles and senior officials and managerial positions, we are still at 32.9%. Notice again that Rwanda was the first country in the world with the majority of female parliamentarians. In Kenya, we are still even struggling to achieve the 2/3 gender rule, which is something that has been we've been having conversations about for quite some time. And probably those are some of the challenges that are pulling us back, even within East Africa, and pulling us back to this last position. Also, if we look at achieving achieving gender parity under health and survival, we noticed that Rwanda has actually done that, despite the fact that they're still experiencing challenges with reducing the maternal mortality rate, which is still quite high in Rwanda, and they're experiencing about 248 deaths recorded for every 100,000 live births in Rwanda. So if you compare that with where we are at Kenya, as much as we're also making progress, as Darmi has said, we are having programs that are actually aiding our progress, like the Linda Mama, the Beyond Zero initiative. So all these things are working together for the good of Kenya, but we still have some strides to make for us to achieve gender parity when it comes to the health and survival indicator. That said, based on this, on what you're seeing on your screen, we cannot therefore claim that Kenya has an absence of resources to ensure gender parity and gender equality. Why? Because Rwanda's economy is the smallest for the East African countries that are listed there, but you can still see that they are still fast. Rwanda is still fast. So really, it is not an issue of the country's economy or the country's GDP, no, because like I've said, Rwanda has the smallest and Kenya has actually the biggest. So if you're having this conversation, we cannot pin an economic challenge to it. So in terms of performance, we are lagging behind, and we really need to benchmark. And at the IEA, we are working towards doing a policy analysis just to understand where exactly we are getting it wrong in terms of gender equality, so that as we are having these conversations, we are having conversations from a point of knowledge and improving ourselves from a policy perspective. So on the next slide, we just look at what are some of the conclusions we are making based on this. The first conclusion we are making is there is a clear existence of data gaps that limit efforts to track progress and quantify contribution that women are making towards the economy. So what we are linking that to is the clear lack of gender disaggregated statistics, and we are encouraging that moving forward, we should now start making considerations to having gender disaggregated data, so that as we are coming up with policies, we are having data to back it up. For instance, I'll give an example. For employment rate, we have data disaggregated for public and private sector, but we don't have the gender disaggregation now when it comes to by sector. So we need to push to have this done by sector, so that we improve the quality of ensuring gender equality, and also as we have conversations towards a more gender responsive budget. We can only have that if we are going to be having the disaggregated data by gender. We also have a lack of gender aspect in recovery and building back better strategies. And this will just give an example using COVID-19. COVID-19 hit both gender. It hit the female gender and it hit the male gender. But those who had to bear the larger beating, for lack of a better word, was the female gender. So as we are building up and as we are having strategies towards recovery and building back on the economy, we should have strategies that incorporate both genders, because like I initially indicated, both genders were hit by the pandemic. So let's have a strategy that incorporates both gender. And then we have Anna explained to us the affirmative action programs that we have in place. So under that, we have the opinion that they are not accompanied by appropriate trainings. So we have trainings on financial management, we have trainings on procurement. And these are areas that we really, really need to improve on. And Anna explained to us that, for instance, under the Access to Government Procurement Opportunities ACPO, out of the 45,000 tenders that were received, 53% were issued to women. And you can imagine, if we were to go back and check how many women are still in business from the funding that we received, we would be surprised that there was a decline, probably because some fell out of business. And probably that is attributed to a lack of financial training that would actually enable them to push through with their business ideas. Darmi also explained about there being a large number of women owners who are unlicensed at 60.7%. And this, again, because they're unlicensed, it's limiting their access to these funds. What this then means is, if already at the highest number under AGPO, the highest percentage of tenders were received by women, and you can also see the number of unlicensed MSMEs are largely by women, that clearly tells you that if we push and encourage these women to get the MSMEs registered and they now become licensed, the number of women receiving these funds towards their businesses will, of course, be on the rise. So we are pushing and we are encouraging that let us get to a space where we are training, beyond giving the funds to these women, we are training them on procurement processes and on the financial implementation and strategy processes. And then we have women initiatives that are limited to specific sectors, sorry. And we are saying that at the IEA, we are saying that they should cut across all MDAs. Let us not just have a few of the MDAs, incorporating gender initiatives or women-specific initiatives. Let us have this across all MDAs, because like Darmi rightly put, if we do not do this across sectors, then we do not have gender responsiveness when we are doing the budgeting for all the sectors, because you will not include gender responsiveness in a budget where women are not being incorporated. So the only way we can do that is if we push and ensure that women are included across all the MDAs. So that said, I think I'll run this back to Jackie so that we can move to the plenary, because that was just an overview, just giving us an idea of where Kenya is at and what at the IEA we feel should be done to ensure that we are doing better in ensuring gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Winnie, for that last part of the presentation and for the conclusions made. I thank all the presenters, starting with Anna Grace, who started by laying, basically providing the foundation for this discussion, looking at the legal background. She showed us that we have not less than 7 policies. She kept mentioning that the lists are not exhaustive. So we have not less than policies trying to promote gender equality and move Kenya towards gender parity. She also showed us that we are also signatory as a country to not less than 7 international treaties. We've ratified not less than 7 of those. There are others which are not gender specific, but also have gender elements. We have the Constitution, obviously, which emphasizes the need even for affirmative action programs to ensure that previously disadvantaged groups get some sort of redress, and that we have policies to address previous disadvantage. So in terms of the regulatory framework, we saw that, and as we always say in many other policy discussions, Kenya is not lacking in terms of regulation. Thanks a lot, Anna, for that. Then we came to Darni, and she also did a brilliant job at showing us the state of women's participation in the economy, just basically looking at women and the economy. And Darmi showed us the extent of labor force participation by women. And some of the glaring things was that for most of the data that she showed, across almost all the categories, the disadvantage seems to fall on women. There was not one category that I saw where women seem to have the advantage. And I think Winnie has recapped that in terms of looking at the ownership of businesses by women, they are unlicensed firms. She's also discussed some of the disadvantages and advantages that accrue from licensing a business. There's the question of access to finance. There's a question of accelerating the growth of that specific enterprise. So obviously enterprises that are not registered face higher disadvantage compared to the ones that are registered, where the men or the male owned businesses obviously are higher than the female. So she showed us that. She also talked about financial inclusion, and one other thing that came glaring from her presentation was the rankings from the Gender Gap Index that is prepared by the World Economic Forum. And here we saw that while that index ranks countries across 4 critical categories, Kenya seems to be performing suboptimally on the pillar that relates to economic participation and the pillar that relates to political empowerment. We are not doing so badly off in terms of education and health. I think obviously because of previous very specific attempts by previous governments to sort of ensure equitable education attainment. We saw that in the previous government. That's why we have numbers now that actually reflect parity in terms of education attainment, and we're also not doing badly off on health. So I think as Darmi showed us, the thing that we need to rethink or think about is what needs to be done in terms of improving or closing down that gender gap in terms of those 2 areas where we are performing suboptimally. Then lastly, we've had Winnie, who's just concluded, and she's shown us regionally how we are performing, basically showing that looking at our peers in the region, while Kenya, and we've said this, has the largest economy in the region, in terms of gender parity, we are still lagging behind. We are, in terms of closing that gender gap, we are still performing worse than all the other countries. So there's something there that needs to be interrogated in terms of why and what are the costs for that. If we close that gender gap, what would it mean for our economy? So thank you very much to all my colleagues who've made the presentations. That's just a brief recap of their presentations. I'd like to open up to plenary. So anyone who, if you had something interesting and would like some clarification from any of our presenters, or if you have a question, you can definitely ask. But before we do that, before we go to the plenary, I'd like to give just about 5 minutes to one of our partners. I mentioned earlier that the PFM program has been implementing the project on gender budgeting, responsive budgeting, together with Kenyatta University. So I'll give them 5 minutes. There's a representative here, I believe Simon Onwere. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. So I'll give you 5 minutes to basically let us know what you are doing so far, and then I will come back to plenary. Simon, you're welcome.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I was muted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, and the presentation on the screen?
Just now.
I can also share from my end if there's a problem there. Thank you. Thank you very much. As you have heard, I'm Professor Simon Onywera, Professor of Environmental Planning and Management. And in the KU, we have an research associate in charge of field work coordination. And I celebrate all of you women, especially the ladies who have spoken today. And on behalf of the men, actually apologize. I don't know how on the incident that we saw yesterday. There's something that should never happen to anybody whatsoever, leave alone a woman, even if it is a severe accident. And there's something that will traumatize that lady for many years to come. And we apologize, especially when it's coming at the eve of Women's Day celebration. And also just indicating that we are not there yet in terms of looking at everybody as a human being and needs respect. At the KU, we have just want to bring to the attention of the congregation here that we have a number of projects that are running there under 3 thematic areas, focusing on women's role in public service and women, in public and private sector, and then women skilling, and then the issues of violence crisis and women's work, which is what we saw. And should you have the need to know what we are doing more, I think these slides will be put up on the Institute for Economic Affairs website, and you can reach out, you can just observe or check through what we are doing on the link that is provided there. So we have a hub which has 12 projects, if you can proceed to the next page. And the projects are covering a number of topical areas. Who is moving the slides, please, the next page. A number of topical areas within the women's role in public sector. We have the projects that are looking at how women occupy leadership positions and how we could close these gaps. And there are those which are looking at how they are participating, especially in the corporate governance, and also how they are participating in the area of manufacturing, and also our own colleagues there, Institute of Economic Affairs, looking at the issues of responsive budgeting. And the other project which is listed there is the project with the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, looking at constructing the index for women. If you look at this, it fits very well to the conversations that I've had, that basically a number of these, or all of them, are targeting female labor force participation. Next slide, please. Yeah, then within the women's skilling and mentoring, we have projects that are looking at transferable skills that are given to women. There are programs actually in the country, including at the TVET levels, where some transferable skills are provided. And they are tracing actually how these women are getting into the job market. There are also those programs like the internship programs that is run by the Ministry of Public Service and Gender, that is also looking at how to support mentorship activities. The ladies doing this project, or the group that is doing this project, is also doing a tracer study on the successes these groups are making in terms of entering the job market. And then there's also the program that is looking at how the Kenya Women Finance Trust, the KWFT, have actually enabling or have enabled women to participate in productive activities, especially in small enterprise financing, by borrowing loans and how to be educated to understand how those loans they can use them to support them well. And in the last group, we have the violence crisis and women's work, where one of the projects is looking at the effectiveness of programs that are there and initiatives that are there to look at how to support or deal with the issues of gender-based violence, and how these women who are being disempowered through the violence can actually be economically empowered. Next slide, please. And then we have also, the other project is looking at the travel restrictions that came through during the COVID-19. We are aware of how this affected actually many sectors. They still continue to affect many sectors. Many of them will take a very long time to recover. But there's a project looking at how the pandemic affected the tourism industry, and how the performance of the tourism industry can be enabled again. And then the other project where I am myself is this project looking at enhancing women's labor force participation and child development through the Creche program in Tharaka Nithi. And as you will see from the table there, that we have a number of partners who are working with us. These are not the only partners. We have the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, we have the Institute for Economic Affairs, we have the Economic Growth Center in Yale University, we have Busara Center for Behavioral Science, Economics, and then we have Tharaka Nithi County Government as the main, and the UN Women as the main partners, but we also have the Ministry of Gender and Gender as also the main partner, and we have a number of partners within the individual projects. Next slide, please. Just to give you how we are propagating some of the projects, I'm just giving you an example of the project where we are interested in. This is one of enhancing women's labor force participation and child development through the Creche program. I could have presented all the ideas of what the other groups are doing, but in this one we are looking at 3 interrelated studies. And in that topic, if you look at it, it will be more valuable to have to know or to understand women's livelihood activities, and to also be able to see or understand female labor force participation, what activities the women do there. And we actually realized that within the Tharaka Nithi County, and indeed every county in this country, one of the limiting factors is child care. And therefore, the main activity in our project here is to do an RCT study to look at whether the intervention, even intervention on child care is provided, how this will enable women to participate more in labor force participation, and how that program can help children develop and also deal with the issues of psychosocial well-being of the women themselves. Basically, if you think through the projects that Kenyatta University is doing together with our partners, it is targeting labor force participation, and it's really looking at getting evidence on how that labor force participation in whichever domain we are in is being propagated and supported by policy, and how this can be promoted. And this project is taking place for the next 4 years. We have already finished 1 year on the project, therefore there are some results, and we invite you to visit our website to look at some of the results that we have achieved or obtained from the studies so far. Thank you very much, Jackie and the team for inviting me. And inviting the other university in particular.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Prof, for sharing what the KU We Hub is doing. So as he stated, their slides will also be available after this. And if you're interested in finding out a little more about what they're doing, as they mentioned, there's a partnership between IEA and themselves. So if you're interested in learning more, then you can get that detail from that presentation that has been shared. So we go now to the plenary, and I'd like to ask anyone that has a question to kindly raise their hand. I'll see your hand and I'll allow you to ask. So I don't know if anyone has a question. Yes, I see Prof has a question, and so I think I'll just allow you to ask before. You had asked earlier. There's a question still in the chat box, but I think let me just allow you to vocalize it. So yes, Professor Onywere, please. Please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, first a comment, first a comment, and then I'll ask the question. The comment is that we have a number of policies actually that is targeting supporting women in many areas, including even on how to deal with the violences that we saw. But as you mentioned, or as we see it from our end, if these policies are really going to support women, we need to be proactive and create partnerships with many institutions and even many communities, so that the communities are able to speak. And if people don't speak and don't engage, if we don't speak about the incident yesterday and actually really speak about it in every forum, then nothing will happen. We'll continue witnessing those incidences. And then my question comes, yes, Kenya is doing very well in education, but I was wondering, team, whether which is the measure of this education? Is it that the children enter school and finish primary school, or they have finished secondary school? What is the ratio of these women who are engaged? And I'm asking that question because when we went to the field in Tharaka Nithi, we realized, yes, most women have gone to school, but they have only gone to school, they reached class 8. And therefore, most of the married women have actually don't even have the certificate class 8, or even leave alone the certificate for class 4. I mean, form 4. So this measure is based at what level of measure?
Great, thank you. Thanks for that question. Before I ask our speakers to respond, would anyone else like to ask a question? Okay, so he's asking, the global gender gap index that we referred to basically shows that we are not performing very badly in terms of education. But what's the measure that they use? So I'll ask Dharmi to respond to that, because that was part of her presentation, and then I'll ask the others to chip in if anyone has a comment. So we start with you, Dharmi.
Okay, thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Prof, for that question. So the way the World Economic Forum undertakes the global gender gap index is it looks at certain indicators under each of those 4 indicators. So for example, under education attainment, what they look is that they look at the overall literacy rate, then they look at enrollment in primary school, enrollment in secondary, and enrollment in tertiary. So what that means is if our score for enrollment in primary is already, it already shows that we have achieved gender parity, which is we have a score of 1 when it comes to enrollment in primary, meaning at that point of primary, enrolling into primary school, there is equality in terms of the number of girls and boys in school. But you see that now, when you look at the numbers on enrollment in secondary education, the score reduces from 1 to 0.8, meaning there is some inequality when it comes to transitioning from primary level to the secondary level. When you look again at the scores on enrollment in tertiary, we are even lower at 0.7. This again goes to show that at primary, we have gender equality. Boys and girls are all in school, but there are certain issues that are limiting girls' retention across those remaining levels of education. So, and I think even Kenya's data on education that we presented, I think last year's Women's Day, International Women's Day, and a copy of the report is available, actually indicates that when it comes to primary, we have attained gender equality, but then as you move to secondary and tertiary, then you start seeing that male are more when compared to female. So showing that the primary level, thank God for the compulsory free primary education, it seems to have resulted in that positive score. But then we need to look deeper. Why are girls not transitioning, or why are they not remaining in school in such a way that they are all transitioning from one level to the other? So in summary, that's Kenya's score on education attainment and how it was weighted to arrive at 0.92.
Okay, thanks, Darmi. I don't know if Anna Grace, you had anything to add, or you think Darmi has clarified. Winnie also had a look at the gender gap index. Does any of you want to add anything?
Well, Jackie, I think the response from from Darmi is quite sufficient, just explaining how we arrived at that, because we don't just look at education, the education levels. We look at the literacy levels, the levels of education, yes, and of course the access of education, which Darmi has broken down. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Okay, so does anyone else have a question? I'm looking at the chat box. We do not have any questions on the chat box. Would anyone else like to ask a question? As we give people a few more minutes to think about it, I'd also maybe just like to ask for a small clarification. We presented here as a positive the fact that we have some affirmative action programs that are supposed to redress some of the disadvantage. For instance, the AGPO. Are we able to, and Anaji, you mentioned that about, at least from the most recent data we have, we can tell that 54% of those opportunities went to women. Are we able to check from that data the actual value of those contracts, so that we do? I mean, it's good to celebrate that the women were able to access that, but of what value are those contracts compared to the total value of contracts overall? Are we able to find that data, or we can also, if we're not, we can also provide that information later, but it's good to clarify. Yes, Anna.
Yes, AGPO on their website actually just highlighted that as one of the achievements, having allocated at least 53% of those 45,000 tenders to women, but they've not highlighted the value, at least from that page on their website. That's something we could look into, though I'm not sure whether it is available, but probably if I can get that before we send out the slides, we could add it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, absolutely. I think in the past days, we've come across the fact that while this AGPO has facilitated women's access to government procurement opportunities, it's mainly been access to low-value contracts, and that is based on the amount of value of the total number of contracts that they've received. But I think, yeah, we'll need to find that and also add that to the slide, so that anyone looking after this can be able to find that information. Or if anyone else on the call has that information, you can also you can also share with us. So does anyone else have a question? As we move towards closing, I'd like to give anyone one last opportunity to ask a question, to make a comment, or to seek a clarification.
Jackie, there's a question in the comments, in the chat box.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I hadn't seen that. Okay. So there's a comment here from Kwame. It says, thanks for the excellent presentation. Given the keenness that GOK has shown towards global rankings, what would be the suggestion for raising Kenya's score and closing the gap? We surely cannot wait for 5 generations. So I think that's a question to all our presenters, all our speakers today. What would be the suggestion for raising Kenya's score? What have other countries done, and what do we need to do? Okay, so I see Anna G's hand is up. Anna Grace, we can start with you.
Thanks. Mine is just very simple. From the presentation where we showcased the Gender Gap Index, GGI, by the World Economic Forum, if you go further and flip through Kenya's pages, you'd see that there are so many indicators which are actually allocated a value that are not filled in. So there are things like under even just civil and political freedom, maybe election lists, quotas for women at the national level, party membership quotas. What else isn't there? Yeah, such values, if they were present, if that data is available, of course, it would go towards improving our rank. It's better having a value than having none. That's what I'd say. So we need to improve our data disaggregation, because the data is there, but it's not split by gender, so that we can tell this is how much women are contributing towards this sector. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that response. Yes, Daphne.
Yes, to add on to what Anna has mentioned, I second her. And then just to respond to Kwame's question, we know that Kenya is currently working under very tight fiscal pressures, and asking the government for more allocation might not be very feasible as at now. So it is clear that we need to focus our resources to where it has the most impact. And when Winnie was also giving the regional comparison, you see that Rwanda has made a lot of progress in terms of, improving women labor force participation. So even Kenya, we see that we have made a lot of progress when it comes to education and health. So with the limited resources that we have, then I think now the focus should go a lot onto the other 2 areas that we haven't made much progress in. And there is some work that Jackie's program, the Constitution, Law and Economy program, had also done. And they tried to actually quantify the cost of Kenya implementing the 2/3 gender rule. And that is not expensive, it's doable. It's just balancing the gender in terms of representation. And these are some small steps that don't even require, like, let's say, independent resource allocation to actualize them, that Kenya can actually implement. So, for example, we have very low scores in political empowerment, and that overall contributes to our low score when it comes to the overall score on gender equality. So if we can focus on those areas where we already have the policies in place, we have the 2/3 gender rule that can be implemented across both maybe start with the public sector, and then also create incentives for private sector to also follow suit. So that will be that will be a good place to start. And then secondly, in terms of labor force participation, it is clear from the gender gap report that we have made a lot of progress in terms of ensuring that women sit at the table. So what needs to be improved on is when they sit at the table, then they have similar powers and also similar income earnings. And I believe these are things that can be implemented through already the existing policies. We have the Constitution that is the supreme, guiding on gender equality, and we can take advantage of the policies already in place by ensuring that we implement them. Jackie, I second you that we are not short on policies, so maybe strict implementation of all the policies we have proposed this far, and those international conventions that we've signed the treaties to. So, yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for that brilliant response. Winnie, would you like to add and respond to Kwame's question? Yes.
Thanks, Jackie. I think Anna Grace and Darmi have rightly said, and it is just in response to the challenges that we're experiencing and just trying our best to improve on areas where we are not doing so well. For instance, Darmi has explained, we're not doing so well under the political empowerment and of course the economic participation and opportunity. That in as much as we are making progress towards gender parity in economic participation and opportunity, we are still not where we should be. So rightly said, those challenges that we're experiencing, the gender gap issues that Anna Grace has spoken about, we are having the lack of training when we are doing when I mentioned in my conclusion, when the affirmative action programs, the lack of trainings, can we work towards having that? And then also ensuring that women's initiatives are incorporated across all the MDAs. So my colleagues, I think Darmi and Anna have looked at all those areas that we are having challenges in and have pointed towards what we should do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that response. So before we close, I see one last question here from John, and he asks, what to do to push gender gap issues into the election agenda? Suggestions? Could this be one of the building blocks in closing the gap? What do you, so what do you speakers think? What should we do to push the gender gap issues into the election agenda? What strategies can we use to help them that? Yes, Winnie.
For me, I think let's start with this two-third gender rule conversation that we've been having for quite some time. Let's start by ensuring that we actually are meeting that target of having a two-third representation of the women. Then we can actually pick that political conversation, because yes, it could be one of the building blocks towards closing that gap. Because looking at where Kenya has a shortcoming is in the political empowerment and economic participation and creation of opportunities. So if we push on achieving the two-third gender rule, then that would be a stepping stone and a building block, like John rightly puts it. So my colleagues could add to it, but I think that is one of the areas we can actually look at.
Great, thank you. Darmi, what do you think?
I don't have like a textbook answer for that, but in my opinion, I will think just to start up these conversations in the spaces that we sit in. For example, Professor Simon, as brought up the incident, Anna brought it up. So I feel like if we keep having more of these conversations in the different capacities and spaces that we all sit in, I feel like that could really push forward. And again, partnerships like with Kenyatta University Women Economic Empowerment Hub, the University of Nairobi has a similar hub. So there is also need for partnership amongst all these institutions, and taking advantage of media, taking advantage of roundtable meetings with these parliamentarians to push the agenda even as we approach election year. We also have the Kenya Women Parliamentarians Association, KEWOPA, and I know they do a lot of advocating and trying to support even women who are interested in getting into the political space. So I can say that it will be a joint effort by all these institutions with similar interest towards women empowerment to come together and just push that agenda, because the more we speak on it, the more the media reports on it, then I feel like then political actors will be able to pick on anything, because we know politicians always speak on something that will, help them trend or gain some numbers. So anything that's in the limelight and being spoken on, I feel like it could capture their attention and eventually bringing the women empowerment conversation into their spaces too.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that. I wholly agree. And talking about the media, I also saw, I think, The Nation now providing politicians and political parties the opportunity to have a platform where they can share what they intend to do if elected. And one of the things that platform will do is to provide an opportunity for the public, research institutions, think tanks like ourselves, CSOs, to ask questions. And I think we can start by asking them, once those opportunities provided, start by asking them what they intend to do in terms of if they have made any gender considerations in their manifestos, what they would do differently, and how they would ensure that this is implemented. I think that would be a good first step. So given the time, we had intended to close at 12:30. We are a few minutes over that. I would like to now just give 1 minute to each of our speakers to give their closing remarks so that we close the forum. And to do this, I'll start with you, Anna Grace. What are your closing remarks?
I'd like to close it just where you left off. I know it's a political season, election season, and people are making promises, but if we could get concrete promises like, okay, I'm going to ensure that we'll improve in terms of secondary school enrollment by X percent. Like I'd like to see such narrow, not narrow, but firm resolves by political aspirants who will in the end become our leaders. There's that. And then just to conclude by saying, I think we're making an effort when we speak of gender equality and we measure that saying we've achieved parity. Parity by definition is the state or condition of being equal. We are on the way. We've made it through primary enrollment. It's been a long time coming, but I think by ingenuity through collaboration with institutions of higher learning and researchers like ourselves, we can come up with more efficient and effective ways of achieving gender parity. And just to add on to what Professor Onyore was asking, what level education is considered a good measure? For me, not speaking about the level of education, but on every, how do I say this? Every factor considered in checking whether we've attained gender parity, I think the goal is just to get to complete parity. 0.9 is good, but we want to get to 1. So in every way, whether it's economic, political, health, education, the goal is one, which is parity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna G. I'll come now to Winnie before I come to Darmit on the next steps for the project. So Winnie, your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. And first and foremost, to say a very big thank you to everyone who made time to join us on this very beautiful conversation that we've had. And just to say that because we evidence and we have the data to prove that we have made progress in certain areas, it therefore goes to show that we can actually attain and achieve gender equality in all the areas that are covered. So when you're speaking to educational attainment, where we are doing so well as a country, when you're looking at health survival and health and survival, we're also doing very well as a country, goes to show that we can actually do very well in all these other areas. So when you're looking at political empowerment, we just have to sit down and look at ourselves as women and do an analysis and find the missing link and why we cannot go out there and capture that space that women should be capturing politically and move on with it. I mean, our counterparts, the men, are doing so well in that area. What is it that they're doing so right that we as women are not capturing? What is this opportunity that they're seeing and they're grabbing that we are not grabbing as women? And what level of support, therefore, do we need to be able to capture that? So because we are doing well in other areas is a clear and a very sharp indicator that we can do as well in all these other areas. So let's not give up this fight. Well, it's not a fight per se, but let's not give up on this journey of ensuring gender parity. Let's just keep going and keep going. We learn on the go, we learn on the job, and with each score, with each year that we are looking at this index, the progress that we are making should keep us going. So good job to the women out there who keep smiling and who keep shining. We will at some point, I know we are talking about 5 generations. It might not even be 5 generations, but we will definitely get there. So thank you so much for making time, and happy International Women's Day to all the women out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Winnie. We go to Darmi. Give us, let's say, your closing remarks and also what's next under the project.
Thank you, Jackie. So the next steps under this project is we have already spoken to key informants across various institutions, and that will also help in improving the quality of our secondary data that we've gathered from budget documents. And the next step is now to go into doing the gender responsive budget analysis of the government budgets, just to confirm the extent of gender responsiveness and try to see what has been some effect of this government spending on women initiatives, and also provide for alternatives on the best way forward towards attaining women economic empowerment. We will be sharing our outputs on our website, and you can follow up on the website. As my closing remarks, I think one thing that is very evident is when the government commits to something and there is political will behind it. I mean, when the government commits to a policy and there is political will behind it, we always see its success, and consequently, we see its impact on women economic empowerment. And to see other East African countries, as Winnie mentioned, whose economies are not as large as ours, like we're always bragging we have the largest economy in East Africa. So for these other countries to have, already made more progress than Kenya is an indication of it's not a resource issue, but, a commitment issue. So mine is just to call upon everyone in this meeting to just ensure that we keep demanding for accountability when it comes to implementation of policies, and we can do this by actually tracking. So what are some of the women empowerment initiatives under Vision 2030? We are 8 years away from 2030, so we can hold them accountable by doing our own tracking and asking questions based on progress we will have seen on our work. And we are blessed to have been taught something called policy simulation, so we can also build scenarios based on the data we have, just to just to give policy alternatives on what is the best way forward. So, for example, in terms of even financial inclusion, we can build scenarios of how much do women need access to finances for us to close that gap, and then use those kind of data generated from these simulations to further push for evidence-based advocacy. Yes, so other than that, thank you to everyone who made time today to listen to our webinar. And I wish all the women happy International Women's Day. And for men who keep supporting us, thank you for the support. And together we will definitely achieve gender parity. Thank you, Jackie, for moderating this session. You've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Darmi. And thanks a lot to the three of you for putting together that presentation and for sharing it with us. We appreciate your efforts. I will pick up and from where Darmi has left. So we celebrate all women today. And we also thank the men who continue to be allies to supporting different initiatives aimed at just ensuring we get to gender parity. So to the 11 men who have been on this call, we celebrate you too, and thank you. So these presentations, the presentation that has been made together with that of the Kenyatta University will be availed to you. They'll be up on IEA's website as soon as we are through with this webinar. So if you're interested to learn more about this, please go to our website and you'll find this. And then the IEA is a membership institution. So for any person who may be interested in becoming a member as an individual or through a corporate where you work, please get in touch with our communications team and they'll guide you on what to do to be a member. Other than that, we thank you most sincerely for spending your 1.5 almost 2 hours with us. And we hope that in our own individual capacity, we can all do something to break the bias, which is the theme for today's International Women's Day. We all have something that we can do, and the world will be a better place for all of us if we eradicate these biases and we have equal opportunity and inclusion for everyone. So thanks a lot, everyone. Happy International Women's Day and have a great afternoon. Thank you. Sorry, Sikwame's hand up. Your hand is up. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.